Right. So Scott Walker bravely pointed out that fighting ISIS is almost like fighting labor unions. So that means we should talk about labor unions today. And here's some recent news that's coming out.
Drone strikes.
Drone strikes.
Arm the women.
But
here's science books.
Here's some of the recent stuff that's been going down, and I'm curious on y'all's opinion on this, because you guys know that I support. I think labor unions are useful in the United States, but here's some problems that have come up. In California, the ports in California have been shut or have been partially closed for a couple of weeks because of unions, and it's now expected to take 2 or 3 months to clear the backlog. And it's a similar thing that happened back in 2002, where a 10-day lockout cost about the economy about $1 billion a day, and it took 3 months to get things to return to normal. So this is something that's affecting manufacturers, it's affecting farmers, it's affecting people far beyond the ports. And just recently, they came to an agreement, they reopened the ports. In other news, you've got teachers' unions that have been blocking reforms in some of the schools. A couple of years ago, you had Chicago teachers refuse to show up to work. In Wisconsin, Scott Walker got all kinds of applause and popularity for taking on the unions. Right now, there's oil refineries that are facing strikes, and some of them may have to shut down because so many people are leaving. And I realize we don't really like oil here, but it's just another example where it's affecting a lot of other workers. So what my concern is here is that labor unions seem to be doing a lot of things that are making them look bad. And it's not all of them. You've got some labor unions that are really good. You've got the labor unions at Kaiser Permanente, Harley Davidson, Southwest Airlines. They're improving performance, quality, working conditions. Those are the kinds of labor unions that you would want to point out as a Democrat or as a liberal and say that's a good kind of labor union. But you've got some of these really powerful labor unions that have just the right niche, and they're really making all the other labor unions look really bad.
I mean, I would agree with you. When I ran for school board, I had to go through the unions, and they really control a lot of education politics, especially if you look at the state superintendent's race with Alicia Tom Morgan. She was basically brought down by the unions because of her charter school bill.
Really?
Yeah, and that was they had this talking point. It was, well, I support charter schools, but I do not support the privatization of public schools. But nobody was ever trying to do that. But it doesn't matter because teachers look at private school as a charter school as a situation where teachers are going to be giving up control and handing more control over to the parents and to the community. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if you have the necessary amount of parental involvement. So I do think that I
don't want us to get too much into education now. We're talking specifically about unions.
I'm talking about teachers unions.
All right.
And if you look at some of the things that in certain parts of the country, a teacher can be accused of molesting a child and remain on payroll. They might not be in class, but they'll send them to a county facility to watch seminars all day or do paperwork, and they'll maintain their same salary. Like, it's so hard to fire a teacher, and that's a reason why I think we have so many bad teachers. I mean, we have a lot of good ones, but there are a lot of horrible teachers hiding behind the union.
And I happen to agree with Bridgman there. I do think unions do cause some specific harm, such as letting people who should get fired keep their jobs. And I would question why are unions even necessary? Why were they even good in American history? And I will say that the good thing that they did do in American history is that they raised wages to reduce income inequality at certain points in American history.
They got us a weekend.
I mean, it's the only way labor can fight capital.
40-hour work week.
So I totally agree with that. That's great. But now, I'm wondering about right now in American history, and what good do unions do when we can use the earned income credit? When we can provide subsidies for healthcare. When we can increase the minimum wage. When we have these policy tools at our disposal to increase wages. What is the purpose of unions today?
I mean, I believe the unions play a purpose, but I do believe that some unions have gotten too big and too powerful.
The reality is,
and such as the police unions, for instance. Police unions are way too powerful. I mean, you can get away with murder if you're a police.
And dude, just look at it as a system of look at human psychology, what we know about sociology and shit. Like, capital, the incentive is money. So, I mean, the management, the executives, they're going to organize to get wages as low as possible, to have as few workers as possible, as few workers' rights as possible. They're always going to have that pressure. That's never going to go away. That market force will always be there. They will always want to pay less. Mm-hmm. Slavery will always be the ideal economic situation for the person on the right end. So and this is just reality.
True, yeah.
So and the only reason it's not is because law. We fought a civil war over it. I mean. So, the workers have to have some kind of organizing capacity, which is basically a union. That's basically what a union is. Whether they're good or bad, like in specific situations, which a lot of times they're bad. Sure. I don't think they should be able to spend money in politics like anyone else, like any other corporation shouldn't.
I agree.
But
people should.
I think they're necessary to bargain within their employers. I mean, why should they not? Sure. Why should people not have that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I want you as an employee. I want to be represented by a union in case something happens. I mean, but at the same time, I feel like there should be some limit to the point where the union is going to say what you did was so egregious that we're not going to be able to support you.
Well, I think that does happen. I happen to know people that have been labor organizers and labor people, and there is situations that come up where somebody will do something egregious, like you mentioned, like let's say molesting a child, as you use the example. And I know that there are good people in the labor movement.
The most extreme example.
That will say no. That's not our job. Is to defend you over something, a criminal accusation such as that. That's not.
But do you think it's sort of like ISIS? Like maybe they'll overreach, get too extreme, and then so they have to push back. So if they don't if they don't control their own behavior, they're gonna. I mean, that's sort of what it is. Examples. Just these few examples of labor union overreach and just ridiculousness are used to demonize unions as a whole and then beat back unionism as a whole, then beats back like union workers' rights.
That is the reason.
The economic situation for most workers.
You've got a lot of people, especially people our age, and as Brian pointed out, I think you got a lot of people that don't see the need for unions anymore. So I'm personally kind of alarmed for the future of unions, especially private sector unions.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm alarmed about by unions, and I'll give it to Steen right after this, is that unions are supposed to increase wages. However, one thing that they've been very good at doing is instead of giving people wages, they've been convincing people that, you should take these really good health care benefits instead. And that depresses wages, and it doesn't add good value to the economy, it doesn't add good value to people's pockets. They've been counterproductive at increasing wages in that regard, and they were even counterproductive to improving the affordability of healthcare by opposing the Cadillac tax in the Obamacare. So even at what they're ostensibly supposed to be for, they're actually actively, practically fighting against when you look at this kind of macro policy, macro scale, and I'll give it to Steen.
I would say on that specific issue, I mean, the whole issue with employers providing health care has been problematic and mistake-ridden going back to the 1930s. But the thing is, too, is if you look at the decline of unions has been directly correlated with the decline of the middle class in this country, with trade policy and otherwise. And the fact that you see, if you look at income inequality, you look at wage increases and things like that, the middle class and the working class are not seeing the increases in wages to match even the rate of inflation quite often. And that's directly correlated to the decline of unions.
And you weren't really making an argument against unions as a whole. Yeah. You were just citing some examples of them.
And what Scott is saying about, that's the main point of unions. It allows the workers or the body of labor as a whole to be able to have at least some sort of an equal footing to negotiate as a unified group against management corporations. Right. And, they need reform. I think that the union movement got very complacent. They became bloated and inefficient, just like many other agencies and organizations. But I don't think you can throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I mean, unions are dying.
Throwing out babies, Brian, you psycho.
Steen, I think you're right in principle, but I didn't really like your historical correlation, too, because a big confounding factor there is just the collapse in manufacturing and globalization.
That's right. Which unions opposed, might I add. If you look at some of the main opposition to NAFTA and other agreements like that, has been unions, and they basically got ran over.
But does that mean that more people in China, the unions in America just want more villagers in China to remain villagers in China? They need unions in China. And
they need that in China and India and Bangladesh and Vietnam and everywhere else. They need unions there because they're way behind us on workers' rights.
Yeah, where we were 100 years ago.
Yeah, they need that. It would be wonderful to see an organized labor movement sprout up in these countries like that, like you mentioned.
And I don't oppose that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That labor as a whole needs to work together, and the thing is that
solidarity forever.
I have a question for the dirtbag in the room, and then we need to wrap it up.
And who's the dirtbag?
Scott Brown. I'm curious because we're very much, and I feel like you lead on this more than anyone else. The problems of plutocracy and special interests. But this is an example where there's a plutocratic group that largely agrees with you, right? I mean, I feel like labor unions in general.
I wouldn't say that, no.
Really?
I mean, the Keystone XL pipeline. I mean, the Steelworkers Union were for that. I mean, there was they had counter protests. There's plenty of examples where every example you guys are going to cite a union overreach, I think, is damn foolish. Anytime protecting teachers' jobs who shouldn't have their jobs, protecting people who molest kids, like Bridgemont says. I don't know about
corporate overreach on the other
yeah,
end.
I mean, I don't.
And there's plenty of people that get
That's
fired
not an argument
for
against
outrageous
unions.
reasons. So
I mean, I'm not saying unions aren't corrupt. I think unions are corrupt now, and I think
unions
I
are
think part of it
definitely
is because the political, they were able to buy a lot of political power. They were the ones who paved the way for the political power. The whole game plan that corporations took over in the late 70s, but corporations came in and made so much more money off taking that political power that they were able to spend so much more money back into it, and it's just positive feedback cycle. Yeah. Whereas with unions, they don't get that much more money in comparison to their political power, but corporations get a lot more in return.
And you look at how
and then they spend.
Look at the Koch brothers and how they strike fear into to Republicans' heart, and knowing that they have enough money to make them or break them. The same way Democrats feel about unions. Because
right.
if you say the wrong thing, piss off the wrong person, you can piss off an individual, and your whole campaign to be tanked.
And I'll just throw in too that I think that's been part of the decline is that they have become corrupt, and in a way getting in bed with the Democratic Party going back to the 1960s, 1970s when they began to increasingly move that way has damaged the movement because they became much more politically oriented, much more partisan oriented, and it was problematic. And I think that's one of the main reasons.
we got to take this out. I think it's a good thing that we can agree that criticizing labor unions when they do act wrong, I think in the long run strengthens labor unions. So I'm glad to see that some people are willing to do that. All right, got to close out.
Woo! Solidarity forever! Solidarity forever! Come on, Bridgemont, whatever, dude. Bad socialist.